I'm giving a presentation about that it really is, we're showing a film about tomorrow, which is a much better presentation of all the things I'm going to talk about. So this is kind of a preview of the concepts and the ideas that film gets across in a much better way. And so this, I think, is a good primer for starting to understand the kind of breadth of the subject, which is a big topic. And then hopefully the film, hopefully you're all able to see it tomorrow. But our goal, the first film we made was called Gaza Fights for Freedom. You may have seen it, but I think that we made that film intending for it to be used mainly as an organizing tool, something that people active around Palestine can show people, organize events around, educate others, and we think that very much became that. And so the goal with this film, it was the same thing. It's like we want people to be able to take this and link the environmental movement with the anti-militarism movement because it's imperative that that happens because there is no way to do the changes we need to save the planet without linking it to the struggle against American imperialism. And so, the film, it's taken 5 years to make, which we did not anticipate, but it's because the topic was much bigger than we anticipated. And so it was kind of a journey going through the more and more things becoming important for the topic. So I'm just going to take you through briefly kind of what many of those things are, and then hopefully it encourages you to come see the film tomorrow. Go ahead. Okay, so one of the reasons that the US military is the biggest polluter on the planet, which has been said, and I'm sure you've all heard that quote, the US military is the biggest institutional polluter, it's because it's the biggest military ever, by a lot. And for example, the US Air Force is bigger than the next 6 biggest air forces combined in terms of aircraft. So that's a lot, that's pretty big. And then of course, in terms of bases, it is the only country that has a massive expanse of bases across the entire world. The only, over 1,000 bases. The only country that comes close is the UK with like a little over 100 bases, but the US uses all of those too, so they're technically US bases. The only adversaries that have overseas bases that don't let the US military use them is Russia with like 7, China with 1. And so it's really not a thing. Like nobody, like if you add up every other country's overseas bases, if you add them all up, the US, even the UK, the US still has like 10 times more than all the rest of the countries in the world overseas bases put together. So it's a strange thing. It's not a normal thing, and it's just kind of this unacknowledged reality of our society that we have this big expansive empire, but that empire comes at a huge cost to the planet for all of the reasons that I'm going to get into, and that's what we hope to get across in this film. Next slide. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, so these are kind of broad topics that I'll be getting into individually. There's emissions we've heard a bit about, toxic dumping, war fallout, habitat destruction, ocean disruption, and fossil fuel enforcement. So let's go to the next one. Okay, next slide. So, this idea that, we heard, in the first presentation also, we heard about how the Pentagon is like the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet, which really, when you hear that, it's hard to picture what that really means. And even that it uses more than most countries. It works out to about 260,000 barrels of oil per day to make the US empire be able to function. And so that the emissions that are calculated from that, because the Pentagon doesn't calculate its own emissions, it just reports fuel use, and then you can extrapolate out how much carbon emissions that actually is. It makes it bigger than 140 countries. But that fact that you hear is based on that the US military is the biggest institutional polluter. That fact is from their official numbers. And so when you go much deeper, there is much more emissions that they are responsible for that go far beyond its official numbers. And so one of the things we do in the film is try to calculate actually what that is, and it turns out it's too vast to calculate, but it's big and a lot more than most people think, even within this world of understanding military pollution. And then the other thing is that some of you may know that these numbers of fuel consumption are exempt from international climate agreements. So when the US goes to Paris or to the COPs, when they say, oh, we're going to cut our emissions by 50% over the next 30 years, they're not counting their military emissions at all. And so it's just fake. And so this idea that, these climate negotiations are going to save the planet, and every other country does it too because the US did it on the basis of national security. So the idea that all these countries get together and say, guess what, we made a deal, we're going to cut emissions by this much, which is not enough to save the planet, but they come up with this number anyway and pat themselves on the back, the number's fake because they don't count the consumption of oil used for the military on the basis of national security, because if you know how much oil they use, you'll know that's intelligence that you can use to attack America. Continue. So that's a big topic that's kind of the first act in the film, is this whole issue. And so there's obviously a lot more to say about it, but that's just kind of the overview. Toxic dumping, go to the next one. Okay, so everywhere that I mentioned, there's a lot of bases. There's like around 600 in the United States and over 1,000 everywhere. Everywhere that there is a military base, there is contamination coming out of it. And that doesn't even count former military installations where there's storage of things like that. So it's really thousands and thousands of military sites that have a myriad of contaminants coming out of them. Like a lot, right? I mean, if you have a chemical company and there's contaminants from that chemical company, it's probably like one type of contamination. I know there's experts here on that, so you could correct DuPont guy, tell me if I'm wrong. But you're usually dealing with like some specific kinds of contamination. The types of contaminants that come from military bases are vast, and depending on where you are or what branch it is, it's different. And so when you kind of put them all together, there's really no comparison with an institution that puts so many contaminants into the environment. Pentagon calculates, this is what they report, because there's something called a toxic release inventory, so they report to another government body how much toxic waste they produce, 550,000 pounds per day, and then some of it they recycle, they manage a certain amount, which is storing it, packing it away, recycling it or whatever, but millions of pounds per year they can't do anything with, so they just dump it directly. They burn it, dump it in the ocean, dump it in the ground. It's a lot of stuff that just doesn't go away. Even if you try to clean it up, it's just there forever. No, you're okay. Go back. Go back one more. I want to make sure I don't forget. Back again. Spoiler alert. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then I think as most, I think people are unaware that they're living in areas that are these kind of sacrifice zones, or that have a disproportionate health impact because of whatever contaminant they happen to live around. In the film tomorrow, you'll get to see what all these different contaminants are and the categories of them and what impacts they have. But I think for those of us who are oriented towards organizing, it is a big opportunity, because if you're near a military base, if you're active near a military base, there is probably some detrimental health impact that comes from living near it that is easily testable, because these test kits for all these different contaminants, you can just buy them and you can test the water yourself. And you can see if there's health disparities in your area just in terms of cancer numbers and things like that. It's a really incredible organizing opportunity to start to raise awareness about the fact that the military is kind of unaccountable. They have no transparency. They always do the wrong thing. So when they know that they're poisoning people, they just try to cover it up. And so time and time again, they've proved that even when they know they're responsible for contaminating people, they will do everything they can to cover it up and then fight the victims every step of the way in terms of getting any kind of compensation and of course, of cleaning it up. And there's a lot of, there's so many examples of this, but we don't have time to get into them. So let's go to the next slide. So war fallout, our first speaker spoke about this a little bit, and I think there's a really common misconception when it comes to fallout, right? I think most people would be familiar with birth defects and cancers in Iraq as a result of the US war on the country. And I think the most common idea about that is that it's from depleted uranium, which is radioactive and is highly toxic, and that the images of birth defects and things like that you see is a result of the use of DU on Iraq. In the film, we interview the top environmental toxicologist who studies Iraq and Afghanistan and the impact of the U.S. war. She said depleted uranium is not the issue. It is a issue, but it's not the issue. The issue is from the most basic munitions, from bullets. Because anytime you fire a bullet, blow up a grenade, launch a mortar round, launch an artillery round, it sends vaporized heavy metals into the environments that do not go away. They just stay in the soil, they stay in the water, they stay there forever, and they have extreme health impacts. And so, go to the next slide. So when you think about places that have tons of munitions dropped on them, it doesn't just kill people when the bomb goes off, but those heavy metals stay in the environment forever, and they make it into people's bodies. They cause congenital heart defects, cancers, and things of that nature. And so, there's, like Iraq, for example, like there's no safe place to live. And so this is what, when you think about climate change, reducing the number of places that we can live because sea level is rising or places get too hot, and people aren't going to be able to live in Las Vegas for too much longer. Sell your house if you got one in the next decade or so. But what about places where you can't live because there's contaminants from toxic waste from the military or from munitions, which don't just happen in war zones, right? Anywhere where the military is training, dropping munitions, shooting bullets, those heavy metals are staying those vaporized heavy metals are staying in the environment. Okay, next slide, because my time's running out. Okay, habitat loss, next slide. So we know that the US military has a lot of bases. They are still building more bases. They don't think they have enough, especially around China. So they're building lots and lots of new bases. And in places where they already occupy, places like Guam, places like Hawaii, they wanted to occupy more of it and use more of the land for military activities, which not only pollutes with the chemicals that come out of it, with the munitions that come out of it, but they destroy habitats to do it. And so one, of course, iconic example is in Okinawa, where there is a bay that's like 8 square miles, and it's one of the most biodiverse areas in the entire world. And the US is deciding to just landfill the entire bay. Yes, yeah, to landfill the entire, yes, but it's, as a vassal state. So they're landfilling the entire bay, which is home to 260 endangered species, just so they could build runways, just in case they want to go to war with China. Yeah, Jeju Island's another great example. And then, there's so many other places where just entire habitats are just used as bombing ranges, firing ranges. Guam is another great example of they use these like really important ancient forests to just shoot them up, and they start fires and things like that because they're just blowing them up. And that's just another example of the kind of recklessness of the U.S. military activities. And most militaries, when they do training, it's on a smaller scale because they're not huge. Next slide. Ocean disruption, yeah, this is a sad one. So it turns out the U.S. Navy applies for permits every 5 years to kill mammals in the ocean because it's like this kind of rubber stamp on reckless military activities. You can go to the next slide. So the scale of this is kind of wild. Like the last permits that they got, which is just for the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean and just for training and testing, the U.S. Navy has a permit to harm 26 million marine mammals over that 5-year period, which the numbers are kind of staggering because, so in harming an animal, it means like disrupting them, harassing them, and sometimes killing them. So most aren't, it's not, we're saying 26 million marine mammals are being killed by the Navy every 5 years. But most of them are being disrupted where they can't feed, they can't navigate, and many of them die in ways that we can't be tracked, or populations are reduced in ways that can't be tracked by scientists. The only way we know they're dead is when their eardrums are blown out from sonars or they wash up on the beach because of military activity. Those are the only mammal deaths you can like directly attribute to the US Navy, but the impact is much broader. And when you think of some of these numbers, like the biggest one on that list is basically about like 5 million dolphins a year they're permitted to harm 5 million dolphins a year. There's like not that many dolphins. So basically every dolphin on Earth is being harmed by the Navy more than once in the course of a year is kind of how the numbers work out. So they have a really devastating impact, and that's just training and testing. That's just when they are blowing up munitions in the ocean to practice and to screw around. And then sonar is what they're doing when they're not training and testing, when they're out on the oceans, when they're doing their normal thing, which the US Navy is a global operation. It's in every body of water all over the Earth with the world's biggest Navy. And in fact, there's only, the US has like 9 aircraft carriers. There's no other country that has more than 2, and there's like 1 country that has 2. And sonar kills marine mammals because it blows out their eardrums, and sonar pings out for hundreds of miles. And a lot of these like training exercises are just like in migration routes, right? I mean, they do them in Alaska, they do them in Hawaii, and whales travel from the spot where they do one to the other one, and so no matter where they are, they're getting hit with these training exercises by the Navy. So that's another very sad and kind of unrecognized aspect. Go to the next slide. And then, of course, Fossil fuel enforcement. I mean, we need to get off fossil fuels like yesterday. Entirely possible. You know, if the country did like a space race to get off of fossil fuels, we could be off fossil fuels in a few years in a very dramatic way. But why isn't that happening? Because we have a country that's run by corporations and the interests of the rich who don't want to get off fossil fuels because fossil fuels is big money, and they have a protection racket called the US military. And so as long as the US military acts as this barrier, not only in our own country, but how many governments have we seen overthrown around the world by the US military because they have energy independence, oil independence. They don't want to cooperate with American oil companies that can pillage the oil to whatever degree they want. And so the role that the US military plays as an enforcer of the fossil fuel industry globally and in our own country is something that shouldn't be ignored. You can go to the next one. And go to the next one again. I hope that there's a happy ending to the film. That kind of is. Everyone's like, you got to have like an optimistic ending. I don't feel super optimistic about the future, but I know I'm supposed to say I do. But it's a little scary. But I think that what I do feel good about is I think that more than ever, kind of consciousness has turned against war, against militarism. I think the war in Gaza has done a lot for people's views more broadly on these subjects, and people care about the climate, people care about the planet, and they care about the future. And there's an incredible opportunity to kind of link these two struggles. It's, like I said before, it's an essential thing. We have to do it if we're going to save the future. But I think there's more than ever an opening for this kind of thing to happen. And then just, you can imagine the possibilities, right? I mean, right now, the role the US plays in the world as like an enforcer of this global order under their rule, they organize every country in the world and every military in the world that's like their quote-unquote friend to do a lot of bad stuff, right? They organize everyone for these big war games so they can practice attacking other countries. They organize everyone under a certain economic system that meets the needs of its capitalist class. But if there is significant change in the United States, the U.S. could play a very different role in the world, where it organizes the world to get off fossil fuels and save the planet and have a more sustainable future. And so, hopefully by linking these issues, we could get a step closer to that. Thank you.
Missy Leon, good for her. She's the first person who has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Big Oil. That is the first individual who's been affected by the horrors of climate change. Her mother died in a heat dome. And so she's suing 7 different oil companies. And I certainly wish her well for failing to warn the public. Failure to warn is a big thing in a lawsuit like this. They knew the danger and they didn't warn. So I think she's got a good chance of prevailing, but of course she's going against very powerful people. What is the oil company's defense? Next slide. They're saying restricting emissions could lead to crippling damages. Oh, no. According to the New York Times, the lawyer representing Chevron in the South Carolina case told the court that both Democrats, listen to this, both Democrats and Republicans have promoted fossil fuel production in the interest of national security. Now, yeah, next slide, please. Now this isn't working, wouldn't you know it? So I'll just work off that. Yeah, I've had a similar quest for accountability. From a different angle. What was behind the crash that killed my father, America's first master spy in the Middle East, following his top secret mission to Saudi Arabia? Yes. I was 6 weeks old at the time. I never knew him, but I did know that his State Department cover was cultural attaché. And the reason for that is he was a Harvard-trained scholar who was highly knowledgeable about the customs and religions in the Middle East, and that's why they considered him valuable. Next, please. For decades, I investigated what oil and the Trans-Arabian Pipeline had to do with my father's death. I even sued the CIA for documents. In response, they supplied this document, 7 pages of it, heavily, heavily redacted. But the redactors missed a sentence that got me on my crusade. We must control the oil at all costs. And so that was Saudi oil, that was his mission, and it meant battling our own allies, the British, the French, and the Russians, all of whom coveted Saudi oil and resented growing American power. Next. I learned from a New York Times article dated March 2nd, 1947, that Arabian oil was vital to rebuilding devastated Western Europe, and that a pipeline was of strategic importance to that plan. And this map really got me off and running. You will see in the lower part, it's dotted. That's the route of the proposed Trans-Arabian Pipeline. And then you'll see another pipeline to the north. It's forked like this. That's taking the oil of Iraq to the same coast, the Mediterranean coast. And you'll hear about that later. But I was focusing on Tapline for the longest time, and then suddenly I realized those 2 other pipelines are really important in the analysis I'm about to give. Next slide. This is a quote from the New York Times issue. The headline, "Pipeline for U.S. adds to Middle East issues. Oil concessions raise questions involving position of Russia." This is most important. The economic and military protection of the pipeline will become a prime objective of American foreign policy in the area and a focal point between East and West. I also learned that since 1911, oil has been the fuel of the military, and that Germany lost 2 world wars because its military ran out of gas. Now, this is the missing connection I'm talking about. Because oil is the fuel of the military, it's a national security issue. That's why you don't hear the Republicans or the Democrats talk about it, because the oil companies have convinced them that it's national security. And I defy you, when you watch TV, to see on all the analysis of endless wars, whether they even get into the whole question of oil being the fuel of the military. Next. So let's talk about the Iraq War, 2003. Was part of it about restoring the Mosul to Haifa pipeline that was closed in 1948? And that was that forked pipeline I showed you before. That was built in the 30s, but it was conceived during World War I. And it has something to do with the Balfour Declaration and the formation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, if anyone wants to ask me more about it. Okay, next. Oh, Benjamin Netanyahu, he boasted that soon the oil will be flowing to Haifa. So Netanyahu was a big cheerleader of the Iraq invasion. And so he wanted that pipeline to be opened up. It had been closed in 1948 during the Israeli War of Independence. And he said it's not a pipe dream. He was sure it was going to happen. But it was because the person who was supposed to replace Saddam Hussein, his name was Ahmed Shalabi. Oh, you know that name, huh? Yeah, right. He favored the restoration of the pipeline, but he fell into disgrace because it became known that he was the author of the weapons of mass destruction pretext. So that dream didn't happen, and it has yet to happen. That is reconnecting Iraqi oil to Haifa. Next. But there were bigger prospects for Bibi. In 2000, and then again in 2010, huge oil and gas reserves were discovered off the coast of Israel, Gaza, Syria, the whole eastern Mediterranean. Now, this is something that seldom gets reported in the press as well. Next. And by the way, that is a platform controlled by Chevron. And Chevron, by the way, is the latest version of Standard Oil of California, which got the original Saudi concession, which turned the U.S. into a superpower, is Saudi oil. So they're still at it, and they're now developing all this oil and natural gas off the coast. Next. Yasser Arafat was thrilled when he heard about all this oil and natural gas. He thought at last there would be some independent income for the Palestinians, and it could help the Palestinian states. But in 2007, the Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon declared, without a military operation to uproot Hamas, no drilling work can take place. And what's happened is that the Gaza Marine is supposed to belong to the Gazans, and the Israelis have made sure it never gets into their hands. Their argument is, oh, this money isn't going to help them, it's going to feed the terrorists. So they're still without their rightful access to that. And to keep it out of their hands, there were two previous military operations since before the October 23. One was in 2009, and the other was in 2014. You may remember it. There were these big slaughters of Palestinians during those years, all to keep the oil and gas out of their hands. Next. This just shows you a map showing where the oil fields are. And who's doing that? It's nice. Who's doing that? Oh, thank you. That's good. So, I pose the question, what country is in the way to developing an energy corridor? You really got to learn the maps. This is all the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. There's Gaza in the south, then there's Israel, then there's Lebanon and Syria. And all of these places have been consumed with violence. What's it all about? Next slide. So there were this big plan before October. The India Middle East Corridor, or IMEC. Now notice that's Biden there, and he's cut a deal with Modi of India. All right, and they got big plans. It's going to connect India, and they're going to run pipelines and cables and so on from India across the Saudi Peninsula, and this will end up in Haifa, Palestine. Next.
Go ahead.
Oh, what happened?
Sorry. My legs are cramping. I just need something to fill my water bottle.
Oh,
Sorry.
so this was a speech that Bibi gave at the UN last year, and he loves maps, you know. So here's the blessing, and there's the curse. Do you know what the curse is?
The curse.
The access of evil, right? Iraq, Iran, Syria. That's the curse. The blessing is this IMEC corridor, which is going to consist of pipelines. And I find it very interesting because it almost follows the same route of the Trans-Arabian pipeline that I showed you on that New York Times map. And they may even want to restore that pipeline. Next. Am I done?
Come close on time.
Oh, we're getting close. All right. All right. Palestine was not on the map. Next map. Next. Here's the thing. They want to create an energy corridor. Netanyahu wants to do that. But no bank will finance it as long as there's unrest. So how do you deal with it? Flatten Gaza, depopulate it, and demilitarize Hamas. That's why all the allies of Israel have kept quiet, because they have big plans, and it goes beyond the new Riviera. It's an energy corridor, and they're going to start shipping oil and natural gas up to Europe. Ties in with the Ukraine war. Next. And then I bring at what cost? We must protect the oil at all costs, my father said. Well, that's a meme that's gone all the way up to the present with all these endless wars, and now we look at the cost, the horrific cost, and that number is outdated. Next. I had to show that because it's, next. I'm almost done.
Yeah,
Next slide.
just had some technical difficulties here.
Oh, I just wanted to show you, this came out in July 2002-03. It's a tanker program run by the U.S. military in a time of crisis. Well, what crisis are they thinking of? You have to wonder. Yeah, see, that's the purpose of it, to provide the fuel of the military. Next slide. I'm going to end on something positive, hopefully. Oh, I think we don't have time for Syria. If you want to ask me about Syria during questions, whether the Syrian civil war was a pipeline war, which I think it was, ask me in questions. Let's keep going. Yeah, the new Syrian president, he's talking oil now. Yeah, they got plans. Let's go. Or then, of course, you all know about these two straits that are key to tanker traffic, and all the incidents that have been happening there, which goes to show, oil is on the military's mind for sure. Next. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I got a call from the CIA. Who would have thought? And they asked me if I would like them to honor my father. So, and I said, yeah, sure. So that was meaningful, and they even told me they consider him a role model because he knew the culture. That's the point. And now, ending. Well, that's just, we can keep going. That's my book, which has the pipelines on it. Next one. Groups are making the connection between oil and genocide. There it is, United Methodist Church. Chevron is profiting from the genocide in Gaza, and then there's one other group I wanted to show, Oil Change International. And they've been focusing on who is supplying the oil to the military machine. They've got it broken down by states and also by countries. And at the same time, they're connecting it to climate change. And I think that's about it. Oh yeah, to conclude, oil fuels the military and militarism fuels climate crisis. And that's it. Thank you. And I would just say, we're learning. When will we ever learn? We're learning. We're teaching each other, and we're fighting back. That's what we have to do.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Veterans for Peace, for the invitation. Thank you, Gary and Cindy, for the preparations as well. I hope you get well. As you said, Ian, exactly, this is a timely conversation that we need to discuss, and we need to take it seriously, very seriously at this time of history, with genocide in Palestine, with continued wars in different parts of the region, not only here in the Middle East and North Africa, but throughout the world. I want to start with a story from Gaza. A young woman at the age of 21, she gets a bomb that unfortunately has poison. She stays in hospital for 7 months. Every day they have a operation on her, and every day she loses some of her legs, and her legs were amputated. This is just to tell you like the implications of these weapons and how these weapons are doing like destruction, like they're putting the poison in people's body, but also in earth. Unfortunately, we're living this, and we're seeing it as firsthand here in this region. We're witnessing it. Maybe we don't have enough studies in here, but still I have numbers to share with you tonight. It's 1 a.m. in Lebanon. It's still afternoon for you. So why is military relevant to the climate crisis? Because the world's largest institutional consumer of fossil fuel, and yet the only sector shielded from climate reporting and accountability, is militarism. US military alone emits more greenhouse gases than entire industrialized nations. And this is just what we track under standard frameworks. Military world's largest institutional consumer of fuel oil, according to CIPRI and according to the Climate Environment Observatory, the global arms sector emits between 5.5% and 6% of global CO2, and this doesn't include conflict zones. According to the Climate and Environment Observatory, they divided the scope of these emissions into three, but they also added one on top. They had the scope 1, which is the emissions that come from tanks, ships, and planes. Scope 2, which includes power needed for military bases. Scope 3, which covers the global supply chains, including mining. Definitely, weapons need mining of these raw materials, unfortunately, that goes instead of going to production, to innovation, to solar productions, they go to destruction and to the development of weapons. But also the Climate and Environment Observatory came up with scope 3+, and I think this is also what matters to our discussion today. It's a term coined by them, adding two key elements: that the climate impact of war itself, such as the fires, the oil spills, and the chemical combination, and the emissions of rebuilding after the war. So it's not only about the war, but it's also about how we rebuild after the war, which are often greater than the destruction itself. In Gaza, for example, Israel bombed released 1.89 million tons of CO2, but reconstruction could add another 31 million tons, equal to the annual emissions of Tunisia. Global military spending in 2024 exceeded to $2.4 trillion, while only $10 billion was committed to climate loss and change in 2024. We must be clear that this is not just carbon inequality. This is climate injustice by design. The war in Gaza did not only destroy homes, it destroyed also the ecosystem. Israeli airstrikes released 1.89 million tons of CO2, and it also had 130,000 cubic meters of raw sewage flown to the Mediterranean Sea. As you know, the destruction, it included the destruction of different infrastructures, the destruction of water, the destruction of people's livelihoods, the destruction of people's homes. And definitely, once we have all these destructions, then also we have the destruction that goes beyond people's life, to the ecosystem, to the Mediterranean that is close to Gaza, and also that is close to Lebanon. So the climate impacts out of militarization in the region does not stay in Lebanon and Gaza per se, but they go beyond to the Mediterranean. And this is a call to our European neighbors to raise it. We cannot keep weapons as such being sent to Israel with all the, not only with the ICJ rulings and others, but also with the implications that it has on the climate change. Unfortunately, crops are no longer edible. The water is 97% undrinkable, and the air itself is poisonous. In Gaza, we cannot say that we have lots of research, but what I assure you is that a friend of mine, we had a meeting talking about the implications of especially those who stayed in the north of Gaza, She woke up one day just to find out that her tooth is falling down. So it's a mixture of a relationship between the impacts of this militarization on food security, on the climate change, on the edible or drinkable water, the edible food. So that the whole thing of this vicious circle of needs, basic needs, make people also life unbearable. Unfortunately, 40% of Gaza's farmland is gone. 39 million tons of debris now coat Gaza's soil, full of phosphorus and heavy weapons. Lots of, also in Lebanon and in Gaza, we have seen lots of the usage of prohibited weapons, such as phosphorus weapons. And we have also some testimonies saying that women, especially women who have undergone white phosphorus weapons, have produced breast cancer. But still, this is not being documented because these people are being killed on a daily basis. Maybe they don't have enough time for documentation, but maybe we need also to create some kind of an approach, a mechanism, a tool that we are able to document it. Lots of news goes to you through the media, but still the lived testimonies go beyond than what we hear and what we say. To a real, I foresee that this is really a genocide. This is really a massive killing of people. Now maybe people are still alive, but we don't know how their body is functioning, how the land is functioning, how the soil is functioning, how the water is functioning. I will go also to talk about Lebanon. We have lived, we're having throughout our whole lives moments of wars, of violations, of the usage of militarization. In 2006, we have seen also how Israel bombarded the oil tanks and how it went to the Mediterranean. Lebanon has a file case against Israel, and we see like how also the Mediterranean was polluted with that oil that split from Lebanon out of the weapons from Israel. But during the last war, in last year in 2024, over than 683 white phosphorus attacks since October 2024 on Lebanon, 5,745 hectares of farmland and forest were completely destroyed, 47,000 olive trees gone, and lots of the rivers were polluted. So having said all of this, it's just to see like what kind of bombs did whether they were sent by the US or from other states. We have seen like these GBU 39 bombs. I'm not going to mention maybe the bombs because it's you don't have one bomb. You have different manufacturers, and one bomb is sent by different countries. So it's not only one country sending, for example, the F-35, but just look at the minerals or the minings that these weapons are made of, the aluminum, the magnesium, the uranium, and other. What about like if these resources were used to the good of humanity? What about also the implications of the climate change and the environmental damage while we extract these from the minings instead of using them for the good of the well-being of people? Why don't we plant a tree instead of investing in a bomb? Why don't we install solar panels instead of investing in drones? Why don't we build hospitals, schools, and desalination plants instead of investing in F-35s? So with everything said, unfortunately, now soil, to detox the soil from white phosphorus weapons, we need between 30 and 50 years. We need hundreds of millions of dollars to remove the rubble from Gaza, and we need decades to restore the destroyed aquifer. What we need maybe here in short just to pave the way for discussion maybe at a later stage, is that how to call militarization is to stop the contributor in the way to climate collapse, as Ian started telling us about the climate collapse. And we need transparency. We need to have the military emissions. They must be reported in the climate plans. And we need to be together like the Veterans for Peace. I'm so happy that we're having the discussion in here. How we together, like feminists, peace builders, climate activists, how we can stand together so that we can raise our voices together, and how we can push forward for a new budget, one where disarmament is climate action and where the money once used to destroy and can finally be used to heal. As Wolf always say, how can we move the money from war to make peace? In short, what I want to end with is that we are witnessing in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Libya, in different parts of the MENA region, the implications. And we have seen lately the certificate, like we have seen like people are unable to access water. We have seen, so in terms of the water itself, we have seen also the number of increase in cancer, different kinds of cancers. And definitely this is also related to the weapons and how these weapons that are poisonous and that are illegal are being used in our region, with the lack of the health service, which most of the money is being sent to destruction instead of being to construction. Last thing I want to say that we need to be working hand in hand so that we can really raise this issue of climate and militarization. They are directly linked to each other. The resources that are being spent to destruction, and at the same time, the resources that are needed to the good of communities and to the welfare of societies and to peace. Back to you, Ian. And I'm glad I'm here, and I'll be staying till the end. Hopefully we can have also a discussion. Thank you.